So there's certain way then it just kicks in.
All right, 1 minute.
Who's this other guy? Is it the intern?
I'm not sure.
Cell phones off. Cell phones on silent. Silent. Right, 30 seconds.
Is it going to show on the screen?
I don't know how. That's fine.
Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, fellows, our heritage fraternity. My name is Robin George. I would like to welcome everybody to the South African Heritage Resource Agency Heritage Webinar Week. It is so lovely to have everyone here. And this week we will be discussing various topics pertaining to heritage, what's been happening in the sector over the last 30 years and more. So please feel free to engage with us. We need your inputs. We would like to hear from you all. We would like to have your opinions and your thoughts, and so that we can make this a wonderful occasion and also a very learnable experience for us all. So with that being said, I would like to welcome everybody, and now we will have the Advocate Lungisa Malgas.
Thank you, Robin. A very good morning to everybody. Good morning, distinguished guests, colleagues, valued partners, and the heritage community of South Africa. It is my great privilege to welcome you to SARA's 2024 Heritage Month webinar. This year's celebrations hold special significance as it coincides with the 30th anniversary of our democracy. 30 years ago, South Africa embarked on a transformative journey, and today we gather not only to celebrate our democracy, but also to reflect on how far we've come in preserving and protecting the rich heritage that defines us as a nation. Heritage is the heartbeat of our identity, and it is fitting that as we mark this milestone, we also pause to reflect on the progress we've made in safeguarding our cultural and historical legacies. Over the next 4 days, we will engage in thought-provoking discussions, hear from experts in the field, and explore new ways to ensure that our heritage continues to inspire and unite us as we look ahead to the future. Today, on day one, we begin with reflections on 30 years of heritage management in South Africa. Over the past 3 decades, we have witnessed remarkable achievements in the preservation of our heritage sites, traditions, and cultural practices. We've also faced challenges, but these have only strengthened our resolve. Our speakers will provide a comprehensive look back, offering insights into the journey we've undertaken to protect and to promote the heritage of all South Africans. Tomorrow, on day two, we shift our focus towards the next 30 years of heritage management. As we look ahead, we must ask ourselves, how do we build on the foundation of the past to ensure that our heritage is preserved for the future, for future generations? This session will be forward-thinking, exploring innovative strategies and emerging trends in the field of heritage management. It will be an opportunity for us to dream big and plan for a future where heritage is not only safeguarding, but also actively integrated into the lives of all South Africans. On day three, we enter the exciting world of digital cultural heritage. Technology has opened new doors for us, making heritage more accessible than ever before. We will explore the ways in which digital tools are revolutionizing how we interact with and preserve our heritage. From virtual tours of heritage sites to digital archives that can be accessed from anywhere in the world. This session will showcase how we are harnessing technology to ensure that our heritage reaches a global audience. Finally, on day 4, we culminated this incredible week with the launch of SARIS 2.0. This is a pivotal moment for us at SARA. The revamped South African Heritage Resources Information System is not only a technological upgrade, it represents a new era in how we manage access and protect our heritage. SARIS 2.0 will be an invaluable tool for researchers, educators, and the general public. It will be available both in person and virtually, ensuring that everyone, no matter where they are, can connect with our heritage resources. This launch symbolizes our commitment to evolving with the times and using the best of modern technology to serve the needs of heritage management in South Africa. As we look to the next 30 years of democracy and heritage management, I am filled with optimism. We have come so far, and yet there is so much more we can achieve as to build a better future. Together, we can ensure that the richness of our culture, history, and traditions continues to thrive, enriching the lives of future generations. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Let us embrace the next 4 days with curiosity, reflection, and a shared vision for the future. May the next 30 years of democracy and heritage be even more remarkable than the last. I thank you.
Thank you very much to our CEO for the welcome and for the introduction, and for the opening. I beg apologies. Next up, we will have Ms. Mamakomoreng Nkasi-Lesowana. She is our Executive Officer of Heritage Resources Management, and she will be doing the introduction and the purpose for this event. Thank you.
Good morning, colleagues, esteemed guests, and dear friends. This is our 4th Heritage Month webinar week since we started in 2020. And we really are privileged to gather every September for us to look at what we are doing, where we have been, and where we would like to be. This sessions or this webinar offers us the opportunity to engage with our clients, our communities, and get feedback and the concerns that those we work with in managing heritage resources may have. It is also a week for us to be able to reflect. And when we were preparing for this year, we really could not just take one theme over the 4 days. We had to provide for a broad spectrum of areas that we wanted to cover. And that is why you will see over the 4 days, we are looking at the various aspects as introduced to you by our CEO. On day 1, it's quite important for us to reflect, because through reflections, we are able to see what have we done right, what have we done wrong, and where can we improve, to innovate and progress in heritage resources management. So we count on presentations and engagement of today for us to be able to see where we have been for the last 30 years of the South African democracy. About a month ago in May, Sarah hosted the 30 years. And so in that, some of us were very privileged to have an in-depth engagement of our heritage and why we are a nation that we are. And I wonder sometimes in these reflections if the young people have time to reflect too. So what is our role as the cultural heritage community in making sure that even within the midst of so much going on, so much information, even the young people, the future of this country, have time to reflect? We cannot just reflect and do nothing. And so on the second day, we are then going to look and get insights and how can we move forward within the next, and we have said next 30 years, which gives us the very, very long-term planning. And we take the insights then from the engagements that will take place tomorrow. And innovation, technology, it's something we cannot leave behind. That is why on the third day, we are looking at digital cultural heritage. What role does technology play within our heritage resources management? The cultural sector was the most hit when we had COVID in 2020. And so how did then technology move us to where we are now? Do we continue to leverage the capability of heritage? Most of the sites suffered in terms of the revenue that they were getting, which in effect is not even much. And so have the institutions then managed to leverage the technology as part of moving forward? And these are the questions that I think we must be honest in asking ourselves. How much investment is being made into cultural digital technologies? On the fourth day, by launching the South African Heritage Resources Information, we call it SARS 2.0, we will then be able to demonstrate as Sarah that our efforts in leveraging heritage and how we are trying to bring heritage resources management to our communities. And we cannot do it alone because not the breadth of this country has fiber, has access to internet. So when we bring SARS 2.0, the question is still about accessibility to internet. And maybe then in the 30 years to come, everybody will be able to access internet and help us then to manage and protect our heritage resources. So friends, colleagues, and our fellows, we really are counting on you to come together over these 4 days to engage on heritage resources management issues as open as possible and to give feedback that will help us to move forward. We gather during this week, and often as we do so, one can say, what has happened with the feedback that we have received over the 3 years? It is important for us that we have these conversations. And so as Sarah benefit from this engagement, it's really a way of us moving forward. And I'm sure if you look at what Sarah has done and progressed over the years, it is because we benefit from this engagement. And so I would like to wish our esteemed panel of speakers a really, really good day with your engagements as the people who are attending this seminar. And so we are privileged, and I would like to thank everybody for making time for this webinar. And happy Heritage Month. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much to our CEO as well as Michael Moran. I think the scene has been set for us who are participating this week. We very much know what to expect. Also, I suppose the things that we don't know what to expect is what questions for engagement will come up, but that will obviously proceed. And we should all look forward to that. Thank you. So for the main session now, the first speaker that we will have up is Mr. Joe Serokwane. So if you will all allow me just to do a bit of an introduction. Mr. Joe Serokwane is an applied anthropologist who promotes transformative education, civic engagement for social justice, heritage, culture, and healthcare practices. His interdisciplinary research spans disciplines such as social work, psychology, sociology, as well as developmental studies. He has about 23 publications, and these all contribute to advancing responsive scholarly practice in a way that aligns with specific contextual nuances. Also, it should be noted that Mr. Serokwane is a council member at SARA. So just before we hand over to him, it was also said that our colleague, Ms. Heidi Weldon, will also speak in the session, and she is from our Heritage Protection Unit for Grading and Declaration. So that being said, Heidi, I hand over to you now so that you can take us through, and thereafter, Mr. Serokwane. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and good morning to everybody present today. If you can just give me a moment, I'm about to share the slides I've been asked to talk to. Okay, so Robin, if you can please confirm that it is sharing and visible.
Yes, I can confirm, Heidi. You can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues, once again. I've been asked to give a brief presentation on an indication of the sites or the resources, cultural heritage of the National Heritage Resources Act, and therefore the existence of SARA. So, as SARA is the entity that is established within the Act to hold for national sites as the national entity. Well done. All of these resources presented today are those that are heritage objects.
So, doing the video when after
So the idea of national heritage sites really is that is when they are considered in total, they should be able to tell us the full and complex history of South Africa. From the development of early life to the peopling of our land, all the way through the various developments that have led us to the nation that we currently are today. So when we start off, we obviously have our various units that deal with various types of resources within the South African national estate. And so I have presented the national resources in such a format. So here we've got the list presented to you. Here is a list of those that fall within our APM unit. And these sites deal with the archaeology, the paleontological and geological sites. And these are geological sites that have particular importance, and then obviously those that also do our maritime history. So I just want to point out a few sites. When we talk about the evolution of early life, we have the Contra Mountains that have been the geological sites or geosites within the mountain range have been displayed specifically to represent the evolution of early birth and the start of early life that evolved. Then we move obviously through to various other, and we've got a lot of paleoanthropological sites, looking at the fossil sites, we have the fossil hominid sites, we look at places that speak to things like about sort of more intangible aspects of our history. And if we look at, we have Lake Njutsi, we also look at places that have a living heritage attached to it, and these are represented in places such as the Stillby fish traps. And then we also look at places that speak to the dispelling of myths that were used to, that were created to justify the oppression that was used by colonial and apartheid regimes. Okay, now one of the things we have a lot of our heritage sites are within the built environment unit and our buildings. And this is because really, we as humans, we act within these spaces that we have created and built around us. And so a lot of events that take place within these buildings and associated to these sites. Where we are different is that a lot of these, there are very few, I don't think any sites, building sites that we have declared based purely on the architectural value of the site. There's a lot more that happens in these places. There are a lot of events that are associated with them, and so this is where the significance of these places, or the national significance, largely lies. So we have places where, like I said, various events took place, so very important or pivotal historical events that took place, such as Lily's League, where with the arrest of the Ravonian trialists, the Sharpeville massacre sites, and then we also have places like prison sites, Robben Island, Constitution Hill, for example, the Madiba House in Victor State. And then we also have those, so there's a lot associated to the liberation struggle. Breakthroughs that have taken place in astronomical observatory and sites. Spiritual or religious developments, and there is a lot more that there are a lot sort of layered significance within all of these sites. But these are just the highlights that I'm trying to pinpoint for you. Then we also consider our burial sites of prominent and important people in South Africa, particularly with politics. And this is where we're looking at the projects such as the founding fathers and our heroism, superiority, and then also but in the same place, or in the same site, also represents during the seminar. And then finally, we look at our heritage objects. Currently, we only have two. We've got the Brass Billyberg collection, and then the 2 copies of the Signed Freedom Charter that have been declared. Objects are a little bit curiosity, also ensuring proper conservation and inventory of these objects needs to be will need to be taken into consideration beforehand. So now this is just, as I said, a brief overview of the declarations that we have, and since the promulgation, it's not quite 30 years because the Act was obviously promulgated a little later, but it speaks to the move towards representativity, and it is very clear that there are glaring gaps within the story or the representation of the resources we have. But it is important to also understand that this is a very long-term endeavor. And so while we work towards identifying the resources that speak to the various aspects of our history, SARA is also in the process of developing a thematic framework which can be used then to assist in identifying these gaps more structurally. And with that, I thank you very much, and I will hand back over to the chair. Thank you.
Very much, Heidi, for that wonderful insight of work that has since taken place within our organization, that is SARA, As you can see, there has been a lot of declarations and there's still pretty much more to come. So with that being said, I hand over now to Mr. Joe Serakwane to take us through some of the things that he has. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I don't know if my camera is dark or is able to see me. I don't have slides. They have my face. I just wanted to show my face for a second.
Mr. Serakwane, you are not, we just see a black square there. I don't know if your camera maybe is not covered or if it's covered. Maybe try to move that.
It usually happens after 30 years of democracy. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Let me close the camera. At least I've got a picture that you can look at.
Okay.
About abilities. Are you able to hear?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. I think it's okay. You can proceed.
Thank you very much. In absentia of Minister of DSEC, Honorable Deputy Minister of DSEC, colleagues from DSEC, my honorable members of the South African Heritage Resources Council, colleagues from SARA, friends of what I would like to call heritage preservation. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, good morning. So, Heidi has presented probably two of the critical questions that embodies the current work that we're doing to the 1999 National Heritage Resources Act. I'm going to push you a little bit to the notion of reflection so that at least we speak with context. And she said, this is really incredible, very complex work. It needs to be attended as such. Just in the interest of foregrounding the notion of reflection as a nexus of the South African Heritage Resources Agency Heritage Week, I'm attempting to provide a sort of a working definition. Reflection is a concept that was first articulated by John Dewey, I think it was in the 1930s. It has since gained traction in multiple disciplines and professional fields, and the conceptual meaning is contextual and has become valid. In 2009, the generic reflection denotes, and my selection here is going to be a little bit biased, but a metacognitive process that occurs before, during, and after situations with the purpose of developing greater understanding of both the self and the situation, so that future encounters with the same situations at least are informed from previous encounters. This week is dedicated to reflecting on three critical questions. After 30 decades of democratic governance regarding particularly the transformation of the South African heritage landscape. So the first question that I would like to address is where we were. The second question is where we are now. And the third question is where are we going? A quick snippets of where we come from. Then I want to encourage you to join the rest of the session so that you can get a sense of how the SARA has been navigating, and everybody that's interested and affected by issues of heritage, how they've engaged with questions 2s and 3s as outlined above. South Africa has a historical narrative that's colonial to the colonial and apartheid era. The legacy we inherited was that is grounded, among other things, in the Native Lands Act of 1913, the Native Lands Act of 1923/1945, the Natural and Historical Monuments, Relics and Antiques of 1923, the Native Trust and Land Act of 1936. These were entrenched by the Conserving Act of 1915, the Population Registration Act, and then of course the National Monuments Act. The implementation of the aforementioned act was closely linked to the politics of dispossession, nationalism, and territoriality, which shaped spatial arrangement and societal structures based on race, on ethnicity, and tribe. The concept of territory played a crucial role in shaping tangible social, cultural, and political spatial geography. Subsequent to that was the spatial making and production of the country as it is. Effectively, the politics of epistemic exclusion, silencing remains a challenge for the country's spatial transformation agenda. While I acknowledge, one, the work that Sarah had done, and also that because of the new policies, as Uma included, there has been an increase in access to spaces that were traditionally reserved for exclusive. So I believe that the traditional meaning and discernment that people make of spaces people inhabit, both temporarily and permanently, still make public spaces unwelcoming and exclusive. This is due to the presence of commemorative markers such as street and building names, as well as symbols and inscriptions representing the colonial and apartheid public historical memory. The act of memorialization or memorializing people and events through the construction of physical markers such as statues and monuments is a long history, one which leaves a lasting impact on the landscape, both private and public of this particular country. In a post-embedded conflict society, this serves as reminders of painful past imposed leaders of the era that shaped the country's oppressive and exclusive history. The past that orchestrated structural and systemic violence through policies of segregation, exclusion, and humanization. Eminent in this logic is the notion of alienation and ideological struggle in the spatial context due to spatial ideology. It's probably very important to note that the end of history or the end of an era does not signify the end of an ideology. Often overlooked are the ways in which this ideology is manifesting new forms. If the material representation is removed, like we've seen to observed during the hashtag 2015 across the world, the intangible remnants of silence in contemporary spatial discourses only serves to make the presence of an ideology even more powerful. People are encouraged to understand this commemorative markers as national heritage resources material as they form part of the documentation of the country's important historical narrative. A historian by the name of David Olsoga, in his column, argues that not all monuments were created equally. He asserts that some were erected for cynical reasons that have little to do with documenting history of heritage purposes. Related argument possesses that images of the past are key repositories of political authority in the present and are easily harnessed to legitimize contemporary political order. In this context, the memories of the oppressed and marginalized and the memories about oppression and repression merge, usually with the double intent of asserting the true version of the history based on their memories and that of demanding justice. Accordingly, Marshall, so rest in peace, put forward an argument that the system dispute around colonial stages and post-apartheid memorabilia will not be resolved without more effectively addressing the complex, often contested connection between what would constitute public memory and its subsequent embodiment in a post-conflict society against the material realities of socio-economic disparity and structural colonial and apartheid legacies footprints, if you like. Elsewhere, people reflect on this as shapes, as ontology. And that should be my quick response to where we from. This is really important because we need to speak to your context. Let me attempt to answer the second question, where we are. 2024 marks 30 years since the dawn of democracy. The Constitutional Assembly had 2 years, I think, between 1994 and 1996 to present a new constitution to the country and was duly adopted as the supreme law of the country. The adoption of the South African Constitution in 1996 was one of the turning points in the history of struggle for democracy in this country. And maybe for a moment we need to pause and we need to acknowledge and celebrate the fact that the resistance and liberation to nominations narrative received a UNESCO listing for its outstanding leadership. And we will continuously try to make sure that the story is told not just at regional, not at just local, not at just national, but also international. And it is not considered that this is the history that needs to form part of the curriculum of the school, secondary, primary, higher education institutions, if you like. The preamble of the constitutions, we, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of the past, honor those who suffered for justice, and freedom and then to respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africans belongs to all that can live in it. And I want you to underline, to bold, to italic, united in our diversity. I often do this because I want us to test this notion with inherent contestation as far as the notion that heritage is concerned. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this constitution, and it goes on to talk about that we improve the quality of life of all citizens, free the potentials of each person, and build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of the nation. This is an excellent tool, but how does it impact heritage preservation and storytelling? Let me highlight a few pieces of legislation that I think are quite important as vehicles that can be used as drivers to make sure that we actually are able to prevent partly what's tied in 1994, the Public Holidays Act was published to make provisions for a new calendar of public holidays. It's a form of registration, it's a form of recognition. In 1998, the South African Geographic Names Council was published. You will remember that I made a case that names sometimes make places a little bit unwelcoming. In 1999, the President approved the Heritage Resources Act, and that's why we have an agency called SARA. Its preamble says it aims to promote good management of national estate and to enable and encourage communities to nurture and conserve their legacy so that it can be, this is English now, bequeathed to the future generation. Our heritage is unique and precious, and it cannot be removed. Again, I want to underline this and vote it. It helps us to define our cultural identity, and therefore lies at the heart of the spiritual well-being and has the power to build our nation. So despite the complex, the intangible, the difficulty that's inherent in heritage, the preamble says, I think it was a tone that says, if you can do this work very well, this is where the country will be. In 1999, the National Heritage Council Act was gazetted. In 2013, the government approved the Spatial Planning and Land Management Act of 2013. On the 16th of March, the South African Cabinet approved the National Policy on Repatriation and Restitution of the Remains and Heritage Objects. Let's all agree that these are great tools of trade, but we need to also just make sure that we test it in the post-conflict society. The democratic transformation, and this is now just pure observation, the democratic transformation project broadly, but in particular spatial landscape, is a call for public symbols representation of heritage national estates that is in line with the values of the Constitution of South Africa. The National Development Plan of 2030 set milestones for the country in pursuit of what I consider two objectives. One, RED, of course, in line with the National Heritage Resources Act preamble for this needs engagement, inclusivity, and social cohesion. The advanced view here is that the statues, place names, and other forms of symbolism in public spaces need to be reviewed in line with the values and the spirit of the non-racial, democratic, and of course, this inclusive South Africa. The conversation on this matter is very full and it's vast. I find two positions quite important because it pushes everyone interested and affected to the margins. It establishes some form of what I call a binary. One is the research arguments that point to that forfeiting the past for the sake of the future is perhaps an overly simplistic way of conceptualizing and describing or imagining how society moves beyond conflict or pain. Marshall is of the view that heritage and the memory of the past are entangled with the social, political, and economic realities in the present, which in turn are overshadowed by the long-term effects of colonial apartheid legacy. True, while arts, culture, and heritage can play an important role in boosting loyalty, other argument was that the democratic pursuit of social cohesion and nation building strategy promotes somehow a banal and potentially dangerous nationalism that is gender and exclusive, failing to redress the injustices of production. Which translates to the new liberal new liberal discourses underscored by the production of space, and of course the recognition of diversity of all the people who live in South Africa. On these accounts, there's a binary position. One aspect advances preservation, reinterpretation, and juxtaposition, while the other support systemic disobedience and leads towards radical spatial reform. It needs to be answered as we craft the way forward. What is the of space that have become public? How do we deal with issues of preservation and conservation in a post-embedded content society? Whose conception of the past should prevail in the public realm? Whose conception of the current should prevail in the future public realms? And whose taste to smell, who feels, whose sights and sound will come to prevail in defining the character and experiences of the city, the heritage city, the new city. Where does this leave us? And what does this mean for the country's transformation agenda? We made progress and we've achieved a lot. It is not easy to traverse the layer of complexities inherent in matters of heritage, but I think it provides really an excellent space for critical engagement, for conversation and dialogue. We certainly cannot afford to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I implore all of us to explore the national in asking even more difficult questions. Heritage protection and interpretation are caught between the balance of object centrism and functionalism. Object centrism prioritizes the cultural object and views its protection as a value in its own right. Functionalism, on the other hand, advocates for the contextual meaning of societal process from the subjective interpretation, and that's why you should please read this in line with what the 1969 Women's Act was about. We shifted from really focusing on objects to bringing something, and I later make an argument for the living heritage. Towards the inclusion end, the argument is for spatial reimagination that will have the courage to disrupt and advance heterogeneity in pursuit of a spatial landscape where differences intersect, where it can possibly influence each other and hybridize in pursuit of dialogic engagement and transformative output. To this end, I propose that we adopt a functional approach. Velocity talks about the re-examination and readaptation of the conceptual framework of cultural heritage based on the following broad conceptual focus. One, that we reduce the distance between cultural heritage as monuments, captured in the commodification view, subsequently objectified and unchanged, and that we move it back to the people as its creators, as its guardians, as its custodians, possessing the multifaceted construct with dynamism, complexity, and multiplicity as its features. More importantly is to consider the role that heritage plays in the lives of the contemporary communities. I want to implore South Africans to replay the rightful place as custodians of this country's heritage resources material. In the academic conversation that advances the notion of living heritage, at its core, it emphasizes the connection between the past, the present, and the future. The declaration is presented earlier negates the artificial division between tangible and intangible heritage. Living heritage includes the continuity of heritage sites for regional function, which speaks to the purpose for which the site was intended, but can also be repurposed, reinterpreted, to form part of the future narrative. Another factor is continuity of care, which speaks to the ways communities take care of their heritage. It is a heritage that is in line with the National Heritage Resources Act. Should be kept to the next generation. I think I made my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Serukwane, our colleague Heidi Weldon, for setting the scene, what has been done in the 30 years since 1994 within our sector. So that being said, we will go on to our next speakers, who's going to be Ms. Kerry Lee Reddy, as well as Dr. Thembi Russell, and their topic is Decolonizing Archaeology in South Africa, 2 decades after the National Heritage Resources Act, the NARA. So if I can just introduce him, Dr. Thembi Russell is a senior lecturer of archaeology at the University of the Witwatersrand, or WITS, and also a curator at the WITS Archaeological Collection. Her research interests include the spread of the first pastoralists and farmers in South Africa, and harnessing archaeology for a better future through community engagement and indigenous knowledge. Ms. Kerry Lee Reddy is a PhD candidate in archaeology at the same institution, which is Wits University, and her interests are South African heritage legislation and its impact on indigenous heritage legitimization and safeguarding. Thank you. So that being said, Dr. Russell and Ms. Kerry Lee Reddy, the floor is yours. Can you hear us? Are you able to present?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Good morning.
We have my slide. That's all visible to everyone.
Yes, we can see. Thank you very much. You can proceed.
Hello everyone, my name is Kerry Lee and I'm a PhD candidate. I will be presenting on the paper my supervisor, Dr. Russell, and I wrote is based on my master's. So it can be found online and it is open. It's well known that heritage plays a crucial role in shaping our identity, preserving indigenous history, fostering shared community values, and embracing cultural diversity. However, colonialism in South Africa is adequately safeguard nor acknowledge indigenous heritage. During the colonial period, most persons was important to recognize that European settler minorities. As she democracy in 1994, heritage was one of the many questions in the U.S. market. The National Heritage Research Act of 1999 aims at the of those previously marginalized. This will ensure that the heritage of Blacks and Brown communities is so successful as colonial heritage was previously enjoyed. Now, 25 years after the implementation of this act, it is time to investigate whether it is successfully transformed our activities. The aim of this paper is to encourage self-reflection among the professionals in heritage industry. Research shows that it is actually giving adequate attention to heritage of those explorers who excluded. As we investigated transformation, I extracted the data on the field of dead sites and soil bases known as SARS. I chose to focus on the field, and based on the analysis, I can compare it to four factors. Pre-colonial heritage is that related to the people prior to European. Colonial heritage was associated with European colonists and apartheid period. The source of democracy. Colonial heritage became off 1999, and this was viewed as liberation driven heritage Black Africans. And finally, the other category for geological features natural type. As we found, that the number of heritage sites declared under the NHRA is nearly the volume of sites declared under the apartheid legislation. The fairest we strike is if we consider that South Africa is one of the most culturally rich countries in the world. And now that the door is off, open to all cultures, we should be clear of way more heritage declared under the NHRA. It's important to mention that the apartheid legislation was in place for 31 years, from 1969 to around 1999-2000. And NHRA has been in place for 25. So that's really only a 6-year gap, yet we're seeing such different outcomes. This next section aims to preface this with the 9 provinces that we see now were not been established in 1994 and before. So we did use them as geographic boundaries just for this paper. While there has been some progress in recognizing pre and post-colonial heritage, particularly in the Western Cape and Gauteng, with these sites, these provinces having declared 47 and 46 sites of pre and post-colonial nature after the NHRA. Every other province is doing Western heritage. But even the numbers of the 2 high-performing provinces are still relatively low, especially when we compare to the magnitude of colonial sites declared during the colonial period. During the update, 46 sites of colonial nature was declared in Mpumalanga, for example, and that is low, considering that provinces like Northern Cape and Western Cape are carrying over 500 at the time. Obviously, after the NHRA, these numbers drastically decreased. Alarmingly, in some provinces, we continue to colonial sites being repaired. There was no recognition of pre or post-colonial heritage after the NHRA. Northwest, for example, when I connected with those 2 years ago with my master's, there were only 2 colonial sites declared available. While it's not inherently problematic to declare colonial sites, it's crucial to remember that all existing colonial heritage has remained within the national space with great heritage. It was supposed to be reassessed, but it is not been done yet. If they need to reassess and potentially regrade these sites towards that the conservation agency by the NHRA is not going to be able to realize, leaving a significant imbalance in our national space. The word I used for my master's was traffic. The national space is traffic with requested colonial heritage. For example, in Northern Cape, 23 gas reform searching for care for 499. For instance, what we're finding is that there's a low number of pre-colonial heritage sites before the NHRA, and we're finding that the list is still full of a high number of European colonial sites related to the colonial period. After the NHRA, we're seeing a high number of liberation sites. And of course, there's a slow pacing of development when the NHRA is holding us back. I'm point one here, the ethical responsibility of archaeologists is the past. In South Africa, there's been criticism of archaeological sites declared as national monuments tend to focus on colonial killable, often overlooking the heritage of the region. Now, the National Monuments Act, which was about the legislation, allowed for the declaration of any site with historical aspects of scientific and cultural significance, not just European heritage. Yet by 1993, only 1% of all national monuments were not related to European colonial. This raises an important question. Why were sites connected to indigenous Africans not recognized as national? Whose responsibility was this knowledge? Why was pre-colonial heritage largely ignored both before democracy and today? Before the NHRA was enacted in 1999, South African heritage was protected by the National Monuments Act of 1969. And during apartheid, the National Monuments Council, which was responsible for recommending sites as national monuments, was heavily influenced by the government, which of course promoted apartheid ideology. This influence is evidenced in various discriminatory laws of the time, which suppressed the rights and cultures of indigenous people. So of course there was no need for their heritage to be celebrated ever this. Even though the NHRA nominated sites national heritage status, the number of pre-colonial sites declared is not significantly increased. This suggests that the legacy of apartheid heritage sites are recognized today. Archaeologists, as gatekeepers of the past, have a crucial ethical responsibility to ensure that the heritage of indigenous Africans is properly acknowledged, promoted, and celebrated. The study suggests that despite some progress, there is still resistance within the archaeological community to fully embrace this transformative agenda. Power dynamics within the field of archaeology continue to reflect colonial legacies, and it's essential for archaeologists to actively work against devices with proper recognition. Answer point two, the continued focus of European colonial heritage in South Africa's national estate can be seen as an inheritance from the colonial past, not just the sites themselves, but also the practices and mindsets of heritage management. People are also about this. The values and system that prioritize colonial history over indigenous heritage This conception is so evident in how non-colonial sites, like Star and Rocker, are undervalued. Such attitudes have long led to the diminished appreciation of African heritage. One of the challenges is that archaeology in South Africa has been slow to transform and diversify. Despite being centered on the history of indigenous South Africa, the profession is often viewed as a white one. Furthermore, there is a growing focus on intangible heritage and liberation heritage, driven by organizations like UNESCO, which prioritize these aspects of archaeological sites. The focus, coupled with the critique of colonial roots of African archaeology, may also prisoners, destroy missing places, key locations associated with the struggle. They carry immense historical and market significance, and they stand on marginalized groups and address the injustice. And since the NHRA's enactment, 105 post-colonial sites in to be related to liberation. While this represents the opportunity, it's important that it does not overshadow other significant heritage. The focus on liberation heritage is not being used to Now they also insight promoting the relationship. So South Africa should also be focusing on what it means in South Africa. The challenge lies in balancing the recognition of the diversity heritage. The consideration of broad spectrum of Africa's rich, diverse cultural history. This has not been fully realized. And SARA continues to oversee many of every group over. But there appears to be no direct link between us. For instance, our relationship has significant post-election. The Western position state has supposedly stronger institutional capacity. However, despite regard to continuity, so given that our instinct and ability to understand and eliminate post-colonial life respectively. And truly the strategy reflects in closing, what we found is that despite the amount of NHRA management now, colonial archaeological sites are often overlooked. The ruling parties focus on heritage pageantry through high-profile state sanctioned projects have overshadowed the NHRA promise to engage in South Africa. And we also look at South African context. The challenging socio-political and economic context of South Africa in 2024. This was rolling blackouts, water outages, high food prices, crime, and this makes heritage preservation a privilege to those who, and I like the average South African. But most of all, the reflection of these issues is first.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kerry Lee Lady. It is very much appreciated, and again, it allows us to think about things happening, obviously, in the archaeological space with regard to heritage. So we have some questions, and I'm going to open the floor up for some incredibly well done. Heidi, if you can unmute yourself and maybe you want to ask the question. Heidi, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Heidi, loud and clear. Go ahead.
Thanks. And thank you very much for the presentation. To find out in the number of places that you considered that were declared under the National Monuments Act, were the places that were declared under previous legislations considered? But I'm just wanting to understand that database a bit more. Thanks.
Okay, so actually SARS their list was very comprehensive. So all the state heritage was actually included from the inspection of heritage management till today. Obviously, I wasn't looking at what currently is available on.
Sorry, can you answer the last comment?
I was relying on management of SARS and comment.
I was disconnected for a second.
Oh.
I am, but I was disconnected for a second.
Okay. If I don't know if Kerry answered you. I don't know if Kerry answered you sufficiently, or maybe you just needed the last section, or else we can move on possibly to another question if you are satisfied.
Please.
Engagement perhaps from the floor, session. If there isn't any, so those that are enthusiastic to ask, from my end, Kerry, thank you for that. It's wonderful. I work in the built environment in particular, but as heritage professionals or working in the space and in the sector, you normally you transverse. It's not that you can just stay in your space, because you'll obviously hear about debates, questions, conversations in the other spaces, and that's actually what stimulates your mind. So from my end, this normally comes, it's what I have from the built environment side, but I don't know maybe if you what your take on it perhaps is. As someone working in the sector and in the space, obviously you're completing your PhD, engaging the materials, etc. What services for you would make things easier, streamline processes? Is there maybe anything that you can that you have? Thank you.
Component, but what I'm finding is that people aren't aware that their heritage can be protected. I think the main source is education, so that people can take into their own heritage.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there that if there's anything that came through there? Kwezi, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much for inviting. I am unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. You can proceed.
No, firstly, I thank you for inviting us and for pointing ahead. And congratulations for organizing this wonderful webinars. I think they do wonderful things for them. And I'm intrigued by the last, and I'm wondering whether, I mean, this is a very interesting numerical outline of how many and what. Are there any, remember we went through a system where the National Monuments Council was centralized, the whole country, and working with four programs where Sarah and 9 class was like the local heritage bodies, but they have not always been perceived to work or to work as well as we all wish. So I'm wondering, what are is there any institutional factors that is mostly just the focus, the conceptual focus, and the towns? And and so it looked back then that they took control of the narrative and the right of ensuring that places are given monumental recognition and so on and so on. Do we still have those? And is my perception that they have declined? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the insight.
Also, why so many sites they try to democracy? Because when I spoke to during the update period, there wasn't a lot of taken into what was said. It was a matter of driving around and seeing a building and repairing it. Whereas I feel like with the NHRA and the legislation we're seeing now post democracy, it's very considered, very significant size for a particular reason. Other than that, I think another reason we could be seeing low number of sites is obviously just finding institutional capacities. Heritage as an arena is obviously not a main priority, and I do think that's a big part.
Kwezi, does that answer your question, sir?
I'm covered.
Oh, you covered. Okay, wonderful. Another question in the chat by Godfrey. If you can unmute yourself, you can proceed by asking the question.
My question is that when you talk about decolonizing archaeology in South Africa, do local communities benefit from archaeological work being done from their land or with their heritage? And my second question is that do they get involved in the interpretation of their own culture and history?
What I'm seeing of the academia coming out of it, usually communities are supposed to be involved, but from the case studies that we see, there's not a lot of benefits coming about. And that's obviously also the what academia and the case studies. Suppose like even with the Indigenous Knowledge Act that just came out in 2019, the whole process is to involve the community. So I think that comes from a place of realizing that they weren't.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer. I see that Mr. Joseph Serakwane, you had your hand up. You can proceed with your question, and then after that, we will proceed to the next speaker. Thank you.
Robert, thank you. I actually wanted to, I'm looking at the CAT site. Thank you for an interesting presentation. I'm particularly impressed with the fact that this work was done after our presidential stimulus program. So the data set that you use, it's credible in that we had 260 field workers through the Kubu tool, and Clinton can speak to that a little bit more, making sure that we actually document sites, and in the process, some of the sites were, and I hear your concern, some of the sites were verified and was documented accordingly. I'm looking at your declaration sites, I'm looking at your Act Bushman, your Act Natural, your Act Historical Relics and Antiques. And it would look like, and in my head, is that I want to position the notion of pre-colonial, the colonial, and then of course the apartheid. It's obvious that the National Monuments Act, because of its blanket advantage in terms of Section 37, or at least what we understand today as Section 37 of the NARA, 37 of the NARA, every monument will automatically be protected. So I understand why there was this spark there. The natural historical monument relics would probably lean towards the colonial, and the Bushman relics and the natural would probably be pre-colonial. Do you want to just maybe give, because I'm a social scientist, a sort of a descriptive account of why we see a pattern when we are actually reporting a lot of that to be of colonial, pre-colonial, the data sets of that and European colonial heritage, 88%. That's basically where Kwesi's tension is coming from. I'd like to see whether your graph will be able to help us with that.
Thank you, Kerry. You can respond. Are you still with us, Kerry? Can you still hear us?
She's got a network problem. She's got a network problem.
Oh, okay. Okay, we were told that there's some network issues. Okay. Are you able to hear us now, Kerry?
Yes, I think I can do.
Okay. If you may be struggling, you can also perhaps type in the chat, and then I can just read it out for you if possible. But you can go ahead, and then we'll move to the next speaker. Thank you.
So I think the question was why so many colonial sites of state prior to the Indian Charter, and why the legislation creates this outcome. And it's really the basis and the political climate that we were in, that didn't want to celebrate but obviously,
Okay.
so I think I would genuinely believe that it was supposed to be this full time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kerry. Mr. Sarkwane, we hope that answers questions and chats and engagements. It is all appreciated. So, in the interest of time, we're going to proceed to our next speaker, and he's also a council member. So, his presentation South Africa. Lay was born in 1956 and grew up in District 6, Woodstock and Salt River in Cape Town. He has been involved politically with various activism causes, and he was also forced to go out on the run for security reasons in the struggle era. In exile, he worked on information and publicity under the Office of the President, I beg your pardon, of editor on various boards. United Kingdom. His dissertation focused on heritage tourism and Black entrepreneurship, involving the heritage niche of Cape indigenous societies and the Cape enslaved from Africa and Asia. He's a retired veteran author, journalist, lithographic printer, broadcaster, soldier, former head of PR in Parliament, and during his years of retirement has been part of making documentary films on hidden aspects of South African heritage. So quite a mouthful, Tariq Malay, and you can take us away. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everybody, colleagues, fellow heritage whisperers. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, sir. Thank you. You can go ahead.
And can you see this? Can you see the presentation?
Yes, we can, with all the lovely flags and colors.
Okay, great stuff. We can move on. The basis of my slavery, and essentially slavery in South Africa, which was then succeeded by the indentured labour system, which in turn, let me stress that over a quarter of South Africa's population have roots going back to the enslaved and indentured labour. And it is the one heritage which is by people regardless of whether classified coloured, black, Indian, and even white. So this is why it's extremely important. Just me trying to move this thing along. Just bear with me, I'm struggling a little bit here. What's happening? Sorry, I'm just trying to get this slideshow moving. Give me a second.
Yeah, okay, we can see it. There we go. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And yes, okay. So 4 years ago, I wrote a book called The Lie of 1652, a decolonized history of land, in which I go back and look at the last 2,000 to 3,000 years of history in South Africa, Southern Africa, African social history, something which is not taught in our universities. And this book was challenging history in South Africa as blatant lies. This book, The Truth About Cape Slavery, challenges history as hidden truths. So this isn't about the truth, it's about paths towards uncovering hidden truths. South African history does not start with what the man we call Skelmer Jannie van Riebeeck in 1652. there's a blanking out of something like 1,600 years of African social history to consider before 1652. It is unfortunate that our university world tends to project as simply being archaeology, Stone Age and hominins and Iron Age and so on, rather than looking at our social history. The founding of the port of Cape Town in my earlier book, the engagement of trade between indigenous people and Europeans did not start in 1652, and South Africa was not an empty land. There were no people called Bantu, Nguni, Khoisan, and black aliens from North Africa did not invade and colonize South Africa in the 15th century. These are all mythologies that are projected as truths in our society. Indigenous people did not passively accept European expropriation of their land and livestock from 1652, and there's a story of 19 wars of resistance over 220 years. And in terms of this book, it was not European expertise and labor from 1652 that developed the land and built the environment. This was done by means of importation of African, Asian slave labor. Now, I often use this simple little fabrication in our history to illustrate the bigger problem about the distortions in our South African history. For many years, we were presented with this picture on the right of the fake Jan van Rieck. You will see that he was on the banknotes, he was on our stamps, on our coins, in our school books. And even today, this picture is projected as though it is Jan van Rieck, but it's a plagiarized picture of a Mr. Vermeyden. His portrait hangs in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. And he was presented as though he was Jan van Rieck. The woman that was presented as wife was in fact Mr. Vermeyden's mistress, Miss Kettering. The real picture of Jan van Rieck is the one on the left. And in the microcosm, this is an illustration of how history and heritage is approached in South Africa. I make the point that restorative memory is vital to the crafting of restorative justice. We attempt to create restorative justice models in South Africa, and we can look at the way that District 6 was handled, for instance, where when they talked about restitution and restorative justice, they asked people to come forward and bring their title deeds so that they can get their land back. But restorative memory tells us that the vast majority of people in District 6 didn't have title deeds and didn't own this land. They certainly paid for it over and over many generations. But the distortion about restorative memory and reducing it down to title deeds affected the skewing of restorative justice. So these books provide new perspectives by exposing hidden parts of a past that has been deliberately obscured by the colonial narrative. And my books encourage people to explore our past, distant and near past, so that we can embrace restorative memory, rather than the over-amplified and dishonest colonial narratives. Now, there's consciousness about the Atlantic Triangle slavery trade, in which over 18 million people were enslaved. But there is no global consciousness, and certainly little consciousness in South Africa, about the Indian Ocean slavery trade, in which 4.5 million people were enslaved. Slavery is tied to America and the colonization of the Americas. But the Americas was not the only place built by slavery. The USA was not the only colony. There were European colonies all over Africa and Asia. And the Indian Ocean slavery trade and chattel slavery system had been started by the Arabs and the Portuguese. It was driven by the first global capitalist company, the United Dutch East India Company. And then it was joined by the British, French, Spanish, Danish, the pirates and privateers, the Swiss, the Russians, a whole range of countries who were involved in the slave trade. Labor by enslaved, besides being exported to the Americas, was the means to build and run colonial settlements, factories, harbors, and plantations in East Africa, Western Asia, India and Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Siam, Vietnam, China, Japan, the Philippines, Malaysia, and across the Indonesian islands, and at the Cape of Good Hope colony. Now, slavery built South Africa, and this is a subject that nobody talks about in our heritage. History is silent about this Indian Ocean slave trade, and it's silent about how chattel slavery operated under cruel abuse in South Africa. And we have this progression in terms of our economic history of slavery, indentureship, migrant labor, and today, labor brokerage. Forced black migration, which was bigger than European migration into South Africa for 227 years, involved the loss of liberty, expropriation of labor without compensation, loss of patriality, crimes against humanity. And while slavery in South Africa primarily affected those people who are classified as colored, which today we refer to as Camisa Africans. We have 195 roots of origin, of which 105 are locations of the ancestors of those who were enslaved. While that is the case, it is also people classified as black, Indian, and even some whites who have African and Asian enslaved ancestry. So in a nutshell, slavery in South Africa, which you can date between 1652 and 1885, started with 120,000 first generation African Asian enslaved who were shipped to the Cape, and on those sea journeys, 20 to 30% died in the journey. Their children and successive generations of grandchildren were born into slavery, another 50,000 plus. That's a conservative figure. And then a further 15,000 to 20,000 local Africans from Nkwe and San in south to Africans in the Boer republics were also captured, enslaved, bought and sold. After slavery ended at different times, the system was replaced by indentured labor and then by migrant labor systems, very similar to slavery, involving 270,000 indentured laborers from India, from China, St. Mozambique and Namibia, and from British colonial Africa between 1858 and 1910. It's a huge part of our history and heritage. From 1652 to 1834, you had slavery, chattel slavery as an institution at the Cape. Formal emancipation happened in 1834, when it was declared, and it was implemented in 1838. Then, parallel to this, from 1834 to 1838, the enslaved that were emancipated in 1834 were forced to compensate their former owners with 4 years of free compulsory apprenticeship labor. Parallel 1807 to 1870, the Royal Navy, after freeing the enslaved from slaver ships on the high seas, brought these prize slaves to the Cape, where they were forced to work for free for 14 years, and for them, slavery only ended in 1870. From 1836 to 1885, the Voortrekkers enslaved, bought, and sold Africans on the Great Trek and in the Boer republics, and this ended only between 1885 to 1890. There are a number of myths that my book points out around slavery in South Africa. We are told by many colonial sources and right up until the 1990s by academic sources in South Africa that we had a mild or benevolent form of slavery where the owners and masters and the Dutch East India Company and the British were actually doing the enslaved a favor. They were offering them a better life than the life that they had known. But what my book does, it examines this myth of the never, points out the capture under violent conditions, incarceration and transoceanic transportation, which resulted in many, many deaths. It looks at how enslaved were bought and sold through auctions, they were bartered, they were swapped, traded, they had timeshares enslaved, they had slaves put up as lottery prizes, they had enslaved who were gifted, there were try and buy schemes, there was rental schemes, families and husbands and wives were split up, they were subjected to master-controlled breeding as though they were cattle, they had inferior food and clothing regimes, and the first pass laws were pass laws that were imposed on the enslaved. The abuse and severe punishment and executions that existed were involving torture. There was crucifixions in the Cape for 150 years, burning at the stake, drowning, impalement, garroting, scourging, dismembering, hanging and drawing and quartering. They were raped by masters and officials. They were controlled through substance abuse and gratuitous violence. We wonder where it all comes from today. But when you go back and you look at this history, you can see why we have certain problems today. Another myth is the myth that the enslaved were simply brawn, laborers. And here's the fact. We have a prominent politician who often runs her mouth off in South Africa about the benefits of colonialism, and she tells us that it's because of colonialism that we have roads and running water and etc., etc., etc. The truth is very different. At the time when less than 1% of the Europeans at the Cape, during the whole of the 18th century, were skilled workers, it is a fact that over 25% of the enslaved were skilled artisans who laid the infrastructural and economic foundations of South Africa. These black artisans would later train the first European apprentices in the 19th century. In 1731, there were a total of only 70 skilled white artisans out of 1,544 Europeans in the colony. And of those 70 skilled white artisans, in terms of hard skills, there were only 50. This was at a time when 25% of the 1,613 enslaved and free blacks were artisans. In other words, 403 artisans. This increased exponentially with the high growth rate of the enslaved population. In 1806, there were 26,754 Europeans to 29,861 enslaved, and around 3,500 free black and 20,426 farm laborers. European craftsmen only began to equal in numbers to the enslaved free black and queer artisans after 1820. By that time, the economic foundations had already been well established at the Cape. The artisan enslaved from over 47 European plantations, colonial settlements and factories across the Indian Ocean arena were relocated to the Cape Colony to fast-track its foundational efforts from 1652 to the early 19th century. These included non-European architects, the so-called Cape Cod architectural wonders they were responsible for, masons, turners, thatchers, carpenters and cabinet makers, wagon makers, metal craftsmen, plumbers and pump makers, agriculturists, coopers, glaziers, joiners, food processors, wine makers, road and dam builders, tanners, etc., etc. All black people, not white people, that did this development of the South African economy. Yet we don't celebrate this. This heritage is a hidden heritage. There's another myth that projects that slavery, you often hear the prefix, the Malay slaves of the Cape. Let me tell you that the enslaved were not Malay nor Javanese. They were rather African Asian enslaved. There was a Dutch law in place, they called them Dutch plakats, and agreements with the Muslim rulers of Malacca, which is Malaysia today, and Java. And and this forbade the Dutch from capturing, trading, or enslaving Malays and Javanese. The Malay and Java ruling societies were traders of enslaved rather than the enslaved themselves. The majority of the first generation of at the Cape of enslaved, 49,000, were Africans, initially from West Africa, but then mainly from Eastern Africa and Madagascar, 9 countries in all. The second largest grouping were from India, Sri Lanka and Bengal, 17,500. And then the final grouping of 13,200 were from across Southeast Asia. That is Myanmar, Siam, Vietnam, China, Borneo, Japan, the Philippines, the Indonesian islands of Maluka, Sulawesi, Bali, Timor, Bhutan, Madura, Lombok, Flores, Sumbawa, and those largely from minority indigenous peoples other than Malays and Javanese who lived in Java, Sumatra, and Malacca. Most enslaved exported from ports in Java like Jakarta, Batavia, and from Banten were actually from India, Myanmar, China, and other Indonesian islands. The figures of those who survived the journeys from the original number of around 120,000 was around 80,000 first generation enslaved. Of course, their children and successive generations of grandchildren were enslaved too. So where does this term Cape Malay come from then? What is the history of the Cape Malays? Firstly, the Cape Malays are a multi-ethnic African Asian group descended from political, religious exiles and enslaved who embraced Islam at the Cape. It has less to do with ethnicity and race or Malaysia or Java, and it has more to do with the Malayu language and culture across Indonesia, and also with the Indonesian exiles at the Cape, these political, religious leaders who reached out to the enslaved at the Cape and did missionary work whereby these enslaved then embraced Islam. These figures already with you, but some of the places of the origin of the enslaved was Cabo Verde, Guinea, Benin, known as Dahomey in those days, Angola, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, Singapore, in the Indonesian islands, 22 locations, Borneo, Papua New Guinea, East Timor, Philippines, 4 provinces in China, Japan, and the Solomon Islands. So you can see that there is a great diversity. I've enumerated this as 105 locations from which enslaved were taken. Another myth is that the enslaved did not resist, and my book deals with this too. Though the price paid for resistance, if captured, was harsh and brutal, and most often resulted in execution after barbaric displays of orgies of violence as a deterrent to the enslaved, did revolt in a variety of ways from 1652 right up until the end of slavery in South Africa. This rebellion took the form of arson, sabotage, individual and small-scale collective revolt against masters and madams, running away, refusals of orders, and other forms of disobedience. They paid a great price for these. But there were 2 cases, in 1808 and in 1825, of substantial large revolts that involved taking up arms. And the one that I focus on here is what we call the 1808 Red October, or the J Rebellion, J meaning you. It was forbidden for an enslaved person to address or refer to their masters and madams as you or she, yea or say. The largest ever revolt of the enslaved took place over 3 days in October 1808, and this was followed by South Africa's largest ever treason trial in December 1808, after which the leaders were executed, their bodies publicly displayed in chains as a deterrent. It involved 346 enslaved and queer laborers who were led by Louis of Mauritius and Abraham van der Kaap. There were also 2 Irish ship deserters which were involved, and the rebels took over 42 farms. They took the farmers and the families as prisoners. Nobody was killed. Their aim was to take over the castle in Cape Town, raise the red flag, and declare a black free state. Lord Dupree, also known as Lord Caledon, had the Irish Dragoon cavalry dispatched to attack and stop the 2 rebel columns in Salt River. After rounding them up and capturing the leaders, major and minor trials were established, and then in December 1808, 16 of the leaders were sentenced to death, and over 40 to prison, and to violent measures taken against them and hard labor. But only 5 were executed, the various reasons for that, and the others with commuted sentences were sent to Robben Island for various terms. We always associate Robben Island and treason trial and so on with the 1950s and 1960s. That was the second largest trial. The majority of the enslaved were given over to their masters to exact punishments, and it was only the next largest treason trial was in 1956 when Mandela and 156 went on trial, also separated into major and minor trials. Another myth is that indigenous Africans in South Africa were not enslaved. Now we know that they were enslaved amongst the Kwe, amongst the San, and the Xhosa. After the defeat, land dispossession, ethnocide, and forced removals of Kwe, San, and Kulukwebe Konakwa, who are a mixed Khoi Xhosa people, the Europeans forced them into becoming laborers on farms, no different to the enslaved. So the Europeans created something called the Inboekelingstelsel, which essentially translated is registered labor. A registered labor system which acted as a de facto system to chattel slavery, except that the Kwe, San, Xhosa couldn't be bought and sold, but otherwise all other conditions of slavery applied. Then there was enslaved in the Boer republics. Firstly, when the Boers went on the Great Trek, these voortrekkers, they spirited away with them. And also on arriving in the new territories that would become the Boer republics, they raided villages, they killed the adults, and they took youth and children as enslaved to develop their new farms as farm labor. Some Boers became slave traders, selling people locally, but also through Mozambique to the international trade in enslaved. And then there were also South Africans who were exported as enslaved abroad. Those from those Boer republics, but also from the Eastern Cape and elsewhere. There were indigenous Africans from other parts of Africa among the enslaved at the Cape in the 18th century, after 1702 from amongst the Xhosa, and also at least one at Groot Constantia from Natal. In the mid-1850s, there's at least one fully recorded story of a Xhosa man, Gobo Fango, who was taken to Utah in the USA as an enslaved man and who died and is buried there. I have a picture of his gravestone. This is an indicator that there were South African enslaved abroad, as is the evidence of the Boer Republic selling enslaved via Mozambique. Now, slavery as a subject is not talked about in South Africa. It's a truth that is largely hidden, yet it was part of life for over 227 years. South Africa's economy was built on slavery and indentured labor and later migrant labor. The people that we call Kwere today are our ancestors. Slavery involved brutal violence, mental abuse, killings, gross exploitation. And slavery, in fact, is the foundation stone of racism and apartheid. These are the chapters here in my book. I won't go through them all, but it's a comprehensive book. It's different to other books on enslavement in South Africa. It raises lots of new issues and questions. It's available in the bookshops. I conclude by, again, coming to this whole issue of restorative memory, how we remember, what we remember, determines how we go forward. We have a history that requires great decolonization. In South Africa, unfortunately, we don't have universities. We have monoversities. The universality of education is highly compromised when you look at the history of our universities. The issue of genocide, slavery, and racism, which is fundamental to who we are and why we're in the conditions that we are in South Africa, is airbrushed out. Decolonized history facilitates discourse. Decolonized history informs social, economic, and cultural transformation. Decolonized history builds awareness on neo-colonialism. We're in a neo-colonial era right now. Restorative memory is what leads to restorative justice. It leads to restitution, and that in turn leads to transformation. We are attempting to deal with transformation without looking at restorative memory, restorative justice, and restitution. And therefore, we cannot get transformation. That's why the subject is so important when we consider our heritage. And that's my talk to you today. There are some of my books. Colleagues, I open the floor to you to ask me some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Millet, for that insightful presentation. It is so useful because a lot of the stuff is just not known by many people, and it's always good that these conversations and these debates actually they emanate and that they can come out in these type of engagements. So with that being said, you are correct now. It is time for some questions. I'll just jump ahead because, I mean, through your presentation, I was burning to ask some questions, but I'll just go ahead with what I got here, and then from the floor and from the chats. And if anyone wants to also, they can just raise their hand, but I'll just go ahead. So my question to you, sir, is how do we get this information, everything basically that you presented, into the formal education sector or system, that being primary school, high school, university, colleges, just making this actually more mainstream? Because this is, as I said, it's not known. And even with the story of Jan van Riebeeck, it's just, there was nothing, Jan van Riebeeck, and then there you go, that's South Africa. And then also just a second one is the commemoration of slaves and the different cultural groups in South Africa. What I'm taking from this is that you said that regardless of race, regardless of religion and culture, black, white, colored, Muslim, Christian, doesn't matter. Everyone was actually enslaved, or everyone has an enslaved ancestor. Do you know of any examples where there are besides maybe like the main ones that we know of, that all basically cultures and these groups of people in South Africa, because we are a rainbow nation, it just tells the whole story of slavery, not necessarily from a white or a black perspective, but just for what it is, basically how you present it. Thank you.
Look, when it comes to what do we do, as an individual from my side, what I did was I wrote these two books, and I've written quite a few others. I've tried to ensure that they get into public libraries, and I've done things. For instance, we had a big problem here just a few weeks ago in the Western Cape, where a school had some of the pupils caging other pupils and doing a slavery auction. It was the second time in 3 years that this has happened in the local school. And I wrote to the education department and offered my services and said that we need to be talking to the parents, talking to the students, talking to the teachers about this subject. And of course, the letter went unanswered from the education department. It is up to us as the public to break down the barriers and the doors, and to take this information outside of the book covers into the highways and the byways. And it is up to us during months like Heritage Month to be exposing the public to these hidden truths, these stories. Now, there's a whole range of ways that one can do it. I've done it by writing books. I've also established the Kabisa Museum at the castle, and I was also fundamental in transforming the old Cultural History Museum into the Slave Lodge Museum. And by the way, when we talk about the condition of slavery, we need to stop using the term slaves. It is the enslaved. We must stop objectifying and mystifying this thing. We're talking about human beings who were enslaved. We were not talking about objects who are slaves. So there's a whole range of levels that we need to be working on. I also encourage people to go and look at their ancestry and to talk about it publicly, because this is important. For instance, I have 30 of my family members that were enslaved from a range of countries in my family tree. I have 8 people who were Quek, my most recent being my mother's granny, my great-grandma. And I have a whole bunch of Europeans as well. So it's important that we bring out this information. I encourage people to go and have their DNA tested, which will show you very, very clearly how multi-continental and how multicultural our ancestry is. It is through this demystification and taking the intangible and making it more tangible that we're able to redirect our society and in fact find the ties that bind us and find the reasons why we have substance abuse today, why we have widespread gratuitous violence. It did not come and fall out of the heavens. It's been part of our society for a long time. We've been a society at war for 4 centuries. We need to be open and honest and to talk about this, because this is our heritage. And it is in this messy past of ours that we may just find what it is that binds us and how we deal with going forward. As I emphasize, transformation cannot be plucked out of the air. It has to be born out of 3 processes. The process of restorative memory, the process of restitution, and the process of reparation. If we ignore those 3, we can never achieve transformation. And if we don't achieve transformation, we'll be perpetually at war with each other.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mallet, for that wonderful insight over there. I see there's a question there from, there's a hand by Mr. Albert Mahopa, but before that, before him, there was a question from our council, or there was a hand, should I say, from Advocate Mandla Mdludlu. Advocate, are you there? You can go ahead and ask the question. I was just informed. I didn't see you on the screen. And then afterwards, we'll take Mr. Albert Mahopa. Thank you.
Hello. I found out from Ms. Malay, the book, is it available in one language, or maybe it has been translated, or maybe can be found? I know, translate not indigenous language, because that would be very difficult. Maybe you would, so that you look, the majority of the authors, they always use English when they write this book, but English is not universally spoken, and then it will actually be limited. That's my first question. My second question, you mentioned the question of some students who are sort of enslaved, if I can put it that way, in the school. I know the school is somewhere in Canada. I'm not going to mention the name of the school. Do you know most probably what race were those people involved, if I can put it that way? Thanks. I don't know whether you understand my question, or maybe did you get my question?
I get the point, yeah. Look, starting with the last part, the very, very sad thing about islands, the thing that hurt me the most, the students who enacted this out, races, were actually descendants of enslaved people. In modern South African classification lingo, they were classified as colored. Very, very disturbing thing for me, that descendants of enslaved people were doing this to other fellow Africans. In fact, the boy who complained and the parent who complained are actually very good and old friends of mine and fellow veteran liberation struggle activists. Obviously and clearly it's in English, and it's only been published. I wrote it over the last 2 years and it's only been published last week. The earlier book, The Lie of 1652, was published in 2020. Again by me, it's in English. It's a challenge that I put out there to people, speaking and writing in other languages, to please make this your own and translate. And if you don't translate it in the direct sense of translation, take the information and begin to translate this into many languages. There's a wonderful book by Ohatle Tema, who was one of the descendants, and found this out accidentally just a few years ago. And she wrote a book on her family story in Gauteng, of how her family were enslaved. And she only found that out by accident by bumping into some academics who had written a book about enslavement during the time of the Boer Republic. There is so much information that needs to still come out. Although my book is entitled The Truth About Cape Slavery, Cape slavery was a catalyst that exported enslavement beyond the Cape into the Free State, into KZN, and into the Boer Transvaal Republic. And hence, many people classified black have a slavery history as well as people who were classified colored. And a large percentage of the enslaved were also from India. And then in the 1860s, 170,000 Indian people were brought over as indentured laborers, another form of slavery. And so we have all of the three black population groups who have history of enslavement. Then we have, in the early years of settlement, in the first 50 years particularly, but also in the next 100 years, a number of non-conformist Europeans who chose to marry people who were enslaved and who had children with those. And through this process, there are a number of European families, they put it at about 16%, who also have ancestors who were among the enslaved. Even if the Europeans today, or white, or whatever you want to call them, even if they don't want to acknowledge it, that is the reality. And so this slavery system is insidious. It crosses all sorts of boundaries. The most prominent 1600s, early 1700s, man by the name of Simon van der Stel, and the following governor, his son, Willem Adrian van der Stel. Simon van der Stel's mother was the daughter of an enslaved woman from India. He had only ever gone to Europe after he was 21. He was born in Mauritius. That is how enslavement crisscrosses the boundaries of these race silos that we have today. So, Mr. Mngudlu, Tate, I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, speakers. And then just the last one, Mr. Albert Macho. Go ahead and ask Mr. Meller your question, and then thereafter we'll proceed to the next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Program Director. I hope I'm audible.
Loud and clear.
Let me first start by congratulating Sarah for this webinar. I'm attending this webinar for the first time through my involvement with Lera in the province, and congratulations for any event of this nature which brings scholars together to share their views. My brother, thanks for your thought-provoking presentation. As you were presenting, I was just laughing. You know, what fascinated me most is on how you focused on history, as a subject, as a discipline, as well as the role of the institutions of higher learning in the country. You know, I served for more than 25 years as an academic at one of the institutions that I cannot mention the name. I had the opportunity of serving, 2 terms as Dean for Humanities and Social Sciences. Now, my concern is, when you talk about subjects like history, no one will ever support you, starting with those that are academics in the very same discipline. And furthermore, when you want to develop programs in a discipline like history, university committees like SINEX and Senate will never support that on the basis that the subject, it will never bring in, generate some money. Now, my main one here, I remember I had a very robust engagement about history as a subject. Yes, I could agree of what I was taught, and some of us were. And if we check it, only when we are to celebrate events like, Heritage Month, Freedom Day, that is where we talk a bit about our history. Now, my question is, how can we have an influence? I know in terms of the Act, institutions of higher learning are independent, but on the other hand, they are being funded, by my text and your text and our text. So now, how can it be done by, bodies, authorities like Sarah to influence the particularly institutions of higher learning who are those are are referred to as the historically disadvantaged. And those the ones that don't recognize history as a subject. Go to the previously advantaged. They are busy teaching, continuing about their Jankan Rebek, etc. But with our previously disadvantaged, where we were taught about the liberation movement, about the role that was played by our guerrilla warfare, when are we going to treat them? And now some of the institutions, those that were previously disadvantaged, are recognized as the liberation routes. But as a subject is not taught. Your comment, please. Thank you for being lovely.
Thank you, Tate Makopa. In my book, I singled out a few of our universities and I named them. And for instance, one of those is Stellenbosch University, which has a program in its economics department that is based on those descendants of enslaved as part of their infrastructure. And this is part of the problem. We don't really have universality in our universities. It is Eurocentric. People don't like the word. I would say it's monocentric rather than universe-centric. And it's a huge problem. I share all of the concerns that you express. I try to challenge this on public platforms. I do speak at a number of the universities, and I've challenged it through my books and through film that we've done film series, documentaries, and so on. Our problem is that government does not put any pressure on the university institutions to embrace transformation and change. Transformation has kind of been focused on veneer. And if we go back and we look at many of the distortions in paleontology, in linguistics, in social history, we see that it has roots in our university. If we take race classification and we go back to the father of race classification in South Africa, who is regarded as a hero in some circles, a man by the name of Wilhelm Bleek. We see here's the man who created and allowed it to jump from linguistics into race theory, the term Bantu. We have other people like Leonard Schulze-Jenner, who, together with UCT professor Isaac Shapiro, who migrated the term Khoisan, which was born out of the genocide against the San and the Khoi in Namibia, to export this into the university environment. And through UCT, it was a term that was made to go viral through a whole range of disciplines, and even now appears in modern genetics, when in fact it's a very ugly word that did not come from indigenous people, but came out of a genocide and concentration camps in Namibia, in which many lost their lives and heads were exported to Berlin and so on. The history of our academic institutions, the mother of anthropology in South Africa, Mary Barber, referred often using terribly racist language. She referred to the Bushman or San as a subhuman category of human being that was one step, this is her words, one step below their relatives swinging in the trees. When when we look at the fundamentals of the various academic disciplines, and I even see it, you know, in the opening video that we had at our conference here, it is so embedded